Hello and welcome to The Agenda. I'm Stephen Cole, and as the track and field events finally get underway at the Olympics in Tokyo, this week we have an exclusive interview with the President of World Athletics and double gold medalist, Sebastian Coe. The track and field events, which for many are the pinnacle of any Olympic Games, have now started in Tokyo. But this meeting will be like no other before it, as the world's greatest athletes attempt to go for gold in completely empty stadia. So, what does that mean for the world of athletics? And how healthy is the sport heading into the most important event in the sporting calendar? To answer that and many other questions, I'm joined by the President of the sport's governing body, World Athletics, and gold medalist in the 1500 meters at both the Moscow and the LA Games, Sebastian Coe. So, Sebastian, a tough one, no fans in the stadium. This is now basically a made-for-television event. Just how important is the atmosphere inside a stadium? Do you remember the impact it had on you?
Of course. You know, any event organizer, particularly in the Olympic Games, wants noisy, passionate fans distributed globally. You know, every athlete likes to feel that in Olympic Games. I remember from the London years that you have a part of that stadium is supporting you, and it's having the hometown fans there. I think we also, of course, under these unprecedented circumstances, recognise. And the athletes certainly do, as I spent a lot of time speaking to them, that this was probably ultimately the sacrifice that would need to take place if they could get the games off smoothly and with a view to the safety not only of the athletes, but the communities that are hosting these events. It's not ideal, but do also remember the athletes have now rather got used to competing in front of empty stadiums, or, you know, at best, maybe only partially full. And we've seen no obvious diminution in their performances of late. In fact, quite the opposite in athletics. We've seen a cluster of world records and area bests and seasons bests that have really kick-started, you know, our sport in a phenomenal way.
So what have the athletes been telling you? Have they been saying, go ahead, after all this training, we're desperate to compete?
Yes, look, not in quite those words, but they know that this is the biggest platform for them in sport. And also bear in mind a slightly sobering statistic, and that is that 70% of competitors at an Olympic Games only have one bite. They're not going to come back. I was lucky, I competed in 2 games, but the vast majority are not going to be coming back for a second stab at this. So they're very pleased that the authorities, whether it's the International Olympic Committee or the governments and cities involved in Japan, or in fact the Herculean work of the international federations, my own health and science teams, have probably done little else in the last year than figure out how we can get competitions back onto the calendar in a safe and secure way. So I think they recognise that a lot of work has gone on in the background. I can't think of another sporting event. Actually, I can't think of another event in the last 50 or so years that has had so much forethought devoted to it in terms of delivering something safely and securely, not just for the competitors, but for the people of the country that are hosting it.
You were being as humble as normal when you said you took part in 2 Olympics. In fact, you were a double gold medal Olympic winner. So how important was the reaction of the fans to you when you were competing?
Yes, look, I'm not going to say to you that I would have rather competed in front of an empty stadium. Of course I wouldn't. But I think these were very different circumstances, and the crowd was hugely important to me. You know, the moment, the atmosphere of walking into a stadium from the Arctic loneliness of a warm-up track, probably 3, 4, 5 minutes away, and suddenly looking up, into the rafters and with 100,000 people there, it's obviously going to be a very different experience for the athletes in Tokyo. But I do think that they have shown an extraordinary resilience to the circumstances that they found themselves in. And look, it's an interesting, and it's a larger topic, but at the very beginning of the lockdown, the pandemic, everybody was saying to me, oh, look, the athletes, it's going to be really hard, which it was, and they're going to have to work remotely, and it's going to be... Actually, in individual sports, most athletes work remotely most of the time, and interestingly, they utilize a lot of the technology. It was far more familiar to them before we all went into lockdown than it probably was to us. Often their coaches are not based in their own countries, 8, 9 time zones away. So it's that type of technology that allows them shortly after a race or a performance to be able to sit down, share the technicality of maybe what they've done with a coach. A training session can be scheduled at that moment for the following day on what you've just witnessed in a competitive environment. So actually the athletes are very well prepared for this. It's not what they would choose, but they are very much better prepared than large swathes of the global populace for the challenges of the last few months.
Of course, the athletes and the swimmers and everybody else have been training, and they're desperate to compete. But what about the extra pressures for the athletes themselves? Once they'd be just purely focused on taking part, now they've got to think about so many other things, not just the masks and the vaccinations, haven't they?
It's going to be a different games. It's certainly going to be a different games. And life in the village is going to be different from what it would normally have been. I was part of the team that delivered the London Games. I know the complexities of the village, but also managing the village of delivering services across 10,500 competitors and another 7,000 support staff and delegates in there. And the athletes are not going to have the flexibility of probably wandering to see, if they're in a British team, to go and see friends of theirs in the American team or the Australian team or the French team. That isn't going to happen. They're going to be in the village 4 or 5 days, only 4 or 5 days beforehand. I think it's 5. And if they lose in the first round, they're not going to have the pleasure of soaking the Olympic experience until the closing ceremony. They will be leaving within 48 hours. And yes, you're right, there will be testing, and their day is going to be effectively from, it'll be village to training venue, and on the days they're competing, obviously the competition venue. Look, again though, let's put this into perspective. Those athletes that are going there with serious pretensions of making finals and possibly medals and even #1 spot are not going to be sitting there being too concerned that they're not able to go off out of the village and share the delights of Tokyo, or enjoy, finding a burger bar or a coffee shop. I'm afraid that's not the world that most of those athletes live in. They actually are there for a job of work. Privileged as it is, we all accept competing for your country in your country colours at an Olympic Games is a massive honour. But they are single-minded and very focused about it, and they will get on with this. And my instinct is those athletes that would have competed well had the Games been able to be delivered in 2020 will be the ones that are still delivering well in 2021. Of course, for some, that may be a year too long, or there may be injuries sustained over the course of the last year that's inhibited their performances. But by and large, I still think you will see those that would have walked off with the spoils last time doing pretty much the same this time.
The Japanese government COVID-19 panel has expressed concerns about the resurgence recently of the number of infections. You're quoted as saying you're not sure there is a huge risk. Why is that?
Because I've been privileged to see the amount of work and effort that has gone on in the background amongst our own health and science teams, certainly here at World Athletics, but the work that the International Olympic Committee has put into the playbooks, the commitments that have been made, the fact that there aren't going to be fans in the stadium, the fact that the athletes are going to be limited in pretty much everything they do. They will not be mixing with the populace in Tokyo. I mean, the thought that 10,500 athletes, as I've heard described, are just simply going to be indiscriminately, dropping into Tokyo for 2 or 3 weeks is just wide of the mark. They're going to be in the village. They're going to be bubbled there. Their visits, their trips out of the village are going to be into equally bubbled environments where they are also going to be competing in front of nobody. So I still think the risk is manageable, and it is certainly a games that I believe can be delivered safely and securely if under restricted and very different circumstances. But the athletes I know are absolutely up for this challenge because they do want to be able at the end of their careers to say they competed in an Olympic Games. Maybe if I have a minor criticism, it is that the amount of work that has gone in the background to deliver these games safely and securely may not have been communicated as well as it could have been to the people in Japan. But I also absolutely understand, because we've all been through this, we all have families, we all have young members of our families, we have children, grandchildren, relatives, elderly relatives, vulnerable elderly relatives. We've all, I do absolutely understand the nervousness of any community that would be staging an Olympic Games, but I do think that those delivery partners in that ecosystem have really done everything they possibly can to make sure these games are safe and secure, and I believe they will be.
Are you sure, Seb, it's not just about money? And the reason I say that is because the IOC income flow, well, it gets 75% of its income from selling broadcast rights. And looking at the figures, and I have them in front of me, it's estimating that if the games hadn't gone ahead, it would have cost them between $3 and $4 billion. So really and truly, is money the main driver behind the Tokyo Olympics? Because that money is then spread throughout sport, isn't it?
Yes, but I see no shame in that. Money is not a dirty word here. Let's be realistic about what that revenue stream does. 90% of all the income that is generated from an Olympic Games finds its way back into the sports. There are many sports who absolutely rely on their 4-year survivability through the broadcast revenue of an Olympic Games. Athletics is in a slightly better place than many sports, but it is still important. And that money is there to identify programs, delivery and development of the sport, to nurture the next generation of competitors, and to continue to drive the spirit that is the Olympic movement. And none of that I see as being mutually exclusive from the need to stage these games. And we should be open about it. Yes, there is an ecosystem here. It's a financial ecosystem that sport is heavily reliant upon. And the vast majority of national Olympic committees, including the British National Olympic Committee, raises all its income itself. There aren't, deep governmental pockets. The games does need to take place. It is the survivability of many of those sports. And frankly, without that income, some of those sports, I fear, would simply disappear.
And it's also true to say that athletics needs this kind of global exposure, because it's never as much in the spotlight as it is during the Olympics.
Of course it is. There are many billions of eyeballs on track and field. It is the #1 Olympic sport. It is, a fifth of all competitors going to an Olympic Games are track and field competitors, they're athletes.
All right, well, we'll take a pause now, but still to come on the agenda with Sebastian Coe, a post-Bolt Games. Who should we expect to replace Usain as athletics' biggest star?
The world's currencies are more connected than ever before. The mechanisms that drive the economy are universal. Money moves markets. We explain these trends and show you how the cash in your pocket can have a wide-reaching effect. Because money makes the world go round. Global business.
The world has changed under the pressure of the pandemic. For many of us, life is returning to some kind of normal. As we're adapting to changes in all of our lives, let Global Business Europe be your guide to the new normal. Join us weekdays on CGTN.
And welcome back to the agenda. Still with me is the president of World Athletics, double gold medalist, Sebastian Coe. So before the break, we were talking about the pandemic and its effect on the Games. But this Olympics is going to be different in another way too, isn't it? It's the first time in many years that Usain Bolt won't be taking part. How important are the big names to athletics?
Well, to athletics and Olympics, Usain Bolt is a huge figure. He will always be a huge figure. The sport isn't uniquely dependent on one person. It's sort of felt a bit like that. But I've been probably more optimistic in the last year about the crop of young competitors coming through in a raft of disciplines. And, you know, our sport is yes, it is, of course, the sport of athletics, but it's made up of 47 different disciplines. And that's important. And, you know, when you have athletes like, you know, Shawnee Miller and Mondo Duplantis and Sydney McLaughlin and Dalia Mohammed, you know, Dina Asher-Smith, you've probably got one of the most sumptuous groups of competitors coming through that we've ever had. And actually, I think at the end of these Games, and that's why it is important for athletics, that these athletes are the ones that are going to be remembered indelibly, as I said a few moments ago. And it is amongst this current crop that we will build, I think, a very, very strong presence for track and field over the next 5 years.
And of course, there'll be some very big names who won't be in Tokyo for more, shall we say, worrying reasons. I'm thinking of the 400 meters world champion Salwa Eid Nasser, for example, because she's serving a 2-year drugs ban. How big an issue is doping in athletics today?
Doping is a big issue in all sports, not uniquely to athletics. I don't think, look, you know, I will say this, I'm very proud to be able to say it. I don't think any other sport out there has done as much as athletics in the last 5 years to put its own house in order. And by doing so, the creation of the Athletic Integrity Unit, which is almost a unique organization within sport, is now being adopted across a number of sports. So yes, you know, nobody is walking away from the you know, the importance of getting on top of the scourge that is drugs in sport, particularly performance-enhancing drugs. But I think the work that the Athletic Integrity Unit has done, and the confidence that athletes, certainly in track and field, my sport, have expressed, has come a long way, particularly in the last 4 or 5 years. Testing is now independent, it's intelligence-led. The unit is made up also of international investigators with real experience in this space. And it's not, of course, just about anti-doping. We have vetting panels to make sure that we get the right people in our sport. We have an election oversight panel. We have an integrity code. It's been a game changer.
A game changer indeed, and you've had fantastic success in cleaning up athletics, and I'm sure other sports will be looking at your example. Do you think do you hope these will be the cleanest games ever, or at least for some time?
I've been in the sport far too long to be claiming that. What I will say is that there is a far greater chance now of an athlete stepping beyond the moral boundaries that our sport is very clear about, of being weeded out and sanctioned. And that is really all you can say at the moment. I think the gap has closed. But look, the Athletic Integrity Unit and the position we have taken is not just about weeding out the cheats. It really is about the rights of those clean athletes, the vast majority of whom have probably already devoted half their young lives to be in a position to call themselves the Olympians in Tokyo. And it is for them that these efforts are being made. Yes, of course, we want to get the bad hats out of the sport, but we also want young people and parents to feel that this is a sport that is going to protect them and make sure that they are able to compete on an open and level playing field. And that's why winning this war is so important.
Can I also ask you about Sha'Carri Richardson, a real potential gold medal hope for the US in 100 meters, but she failed a drugs test after testing positive for marijuana at the US trials. Some people in the sport have said that's quite harsh because marijuana isn't exactly a performance-enhancing drug, is it?
Look, I've heard enough and differing voices to think that there is a merit in a review. That review is much better done. I've talked about them already by organizations like the Athletic Integrity Unit. They're far better placed people to do that than me. And I don't shy away from reviews. I've spent large part of my presidency of World Athletics reviewing systems that I inherited, and in large part changing them and refining them. And review is a very natural order of things for me. So yeah, this is probably the right moment to review our position on this.
Well, it'll be interesting to see that review, certainly. Sport has become also more politicized since the last Games in Rio. One example being taking the knee at sporting events. As a former athlete and wearing your other hat as a politician, what's your take on using the Olympics as a demonstration of political ideals?
Look, I've always been very clear that I want athletes to reflect the world they live in, and we can't have it both ways. You know, I am forever saying to athletes, have an opinion, be bold about what you think. You know, we have positioned athletics as a sport that cares passionately about, for instance, accessibility of sport for young people, particularly in hard-pressed parts of the world. We've been very clear about our commitment to clean air. We even now enshrine it within our own bidding processes. We are a sport that is profoundly anti-discriminatory. We're a sport that is as global as they come, and as diverse and as inclusive as they come. So I am never, ever going to be a federation president that wants to restrict the views of the athletes. I think it is really important. What I do say, and I'm not encouraging athletes to be campaigners, but what I am saying is that if you do feel strongly about something, there is clearly a time and a place, and there is also the respect for other competitors. But my sport has been distinguished and in large part shaped by the stands, the positions that our competitors historically have taken. I go back to 1936, who was able to better demonstrate the risible Aryan views of Adolf Hitler than Jesse Owens in that stadium in Berlin. I was very proud to be able to give the President's Award in World Athletics to John Carlos and Tommy Smith, who took the stand that they did in 1968 in the Mexico Games, which was not just simply about issues of color. It was also in support of hard-pressed, burdened communities wherever they were eking out, their daily lives. So my sport has been, I think, elevated and distinguished by the position that athletes in the past have taken, and long may that be the case.
So let's go back to the sport itself, the most important part of the Games after all. Which events in particular are you looking forward to?
Well, look, you can take the man out of middle distance. You'll probably never take the middle distance out of the man. So it is inevitable that the 8 and 1500 meters are always the events that I really look forward to. But I'm going to be spoilt for choice this year at an Olympic Games, because I have the extraordinary skills of the pole vaulters like Monde Duplantis and Sam Kendricks, male and female, the great performers like, Sandy Morris and Stephanides. But I've also got, the extraordinary mouth-watering prospect of Karsten Warholm and Benjamin competing in the 400 hurdles. The 400 hurdles is a very strong event in the United States at the moment, with Dali Mohammed and Sidney McLaughlin going head to head. So no, look, everywhere you look, I'm actually lucky. I'm delighted that I've got some head to heads that rarely have we had in the sport. I also enjoy other sports. Whether I'm going to be able to see quite as much of them as I would have hoped, although my World Athletics duties tend to keep me to the stadium. But I'm a great judo fan, so I'm fascinated in the progress that one of my heroes, Teddy Riner, the great judo player from France, will be making through this tournament.
I agree. I love the judo as well. But lastly, Seb, what do you hope these Games will be remembered for? Not just COVID, but for athletics too.
I hope these Games are really remembered primarily for outstanding sporting performance, but I think there is a hinterland, a subset here, and that is that the human spirit did prevail through some intolerably difficult months and years, if you like, and that I hope that we are saluting the people of Japan for their resilience and their commitment to staging a safe and secure Games, albeit under very different circumstances.
Seb Coe, one of the greatest Olympic athletes, many thanks to you for joining us here on The Agenda.
My great pleasure. Thank you for your time today.
Don't forget you can watch everything from past Agenda episodes and find additional exclusive content on our website, cgtn.com/Europe, or on our YouTube channel. And of course, you can follow us on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, at CGTN Europe. And of course, remember, you can keep bang up to date with all the Olympic news on our website and social media channels, including the latest medal tables, the best images from our teams in Tokyo, and some of the stories behind the scenes at the most watched sporting event on the planet. Just look out for CGTN Europe's Olympic Bulletin on cgtn.com/Europe. And coming up on a future agenda, anti-social media. Is our online obsession damaging our health? But for now, from me, Stephen Cole, and all the Agenda team here in London, it's goodbye.